Hello again and welcome to the Gospel of Luke. I can hardly believe that today we're able to record for you the 13th episode of our 26-week series on the Gospel of Luke. I hope you've enjoyed our little journey through this first part of this very important and interesting gospel. And we have a special guest today who has been on other programs with us, but not necessarily on a gospel program. That would be Reverend Dr. Norman Broadbent from the First Congregational Church of Fresno. I want to thank Norman for all the times he's been on programs, and thanks for joining us today, Norman.
My pleasure.
As always, we have Dr. Robert Maldonado from California State University, Fresno. He is the one who set up so well our course on Mark, which is now on YouTube, available at KNXT-TV, all 26 episodes. And thanks to him, we've also been able to plow through the first 12 episodes of our 26-part series on another gospel, which we'll just call it the Gospel of Luke. Robert, as we begin, we're going to pick up at verse 14 of chapter 11. And what's gone on recently, for those that were watching or not, we've been seeing the Lord treating of the gospel, treating of the Lord's word. That was with Martha and Mary. And then the Lord's Prayer, when we learned the Lucan version of the Lord's Prayer. Now we're going to see the Lord's power. So let's see if Robert can describe for us and read about the Beelzebul controversy and the next passage after that.
Now he was casting out a demon that was mute. When the demon had gone out, the mute man spoke, and the people marveled. But some of them said, "He cast out demons by Beelzebul, the prince of demons," while others, to test him, sought from him a sign from heaven. But he, knowing their thoughts, said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and a divided household falls. And if Satan also is divided against himself, how will his kingdom stand? For you say that I cast out demons by Beelzebul. And if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your sons cast them out? Therefore they shall be your judges. But if it is by the finger of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. When a strong man, fully armed, guards his own palace, his goods are in peace. But when one stronger than he assails him and overcomes him, he takes away his armor in which he trusted and divides his spoil. The one who is not with me is against me, and the one who does not gather with me scatters. When the unclean spirit had gone out of a man, he passes through waterless places, seeking rest, and finding none, he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it swept and put in order. Then he goes and brings 7 other spirits more evil than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man becomes worse than the first.
As usual, we know that Luke has many of the Markan stories, but then there's always a chance that it's his own, or a chance that he edits it in his own style and reason and purpose. Looking at this passage right here, where would you like to begin showing where Luke is going and why this story fits in his narrative?
I guess there are several impressions that I gather from this particular passage. The first impression is, in hearing it read again aloud, it strikes me how similar this takes us back to the 4th chapter of Luke, the temptation in the wilderness. And the drawing in of some of those same images of the realm of the kingdom, those delineations that the original temptation stories that Luke gives us in his 4th chapter, how they're almost mirrored in this particular passage here. The other thing that for me personally is important is always trying to contextualize how a piece fits. I'm impressed by some of the work that people like John Dominic Crossan have done on the Gospels. And one of the things that he cites is remembering that for Luke's Gospel, arriving as it does in the mid-8th decade, one has to assume that even before Luke begins to craft his Gospel, there are already narratives and stories that are existing within the community of the Jesus Way. And that those would have been stories that were told even before Paul comes on the scene and writes his letters, which are the earliest indication of what life in that community is about. We know that Luke comes some 15 years following the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and this massive dispersal of all of the religious orders out of Jerusalem. The Sadducees essentially disappear, and the Pharisees and the scribes are the remaining group that survive that terrible conflagration. And so the question asked is, as Luke is writing his gospel, to whom is his gospel addressed? Who is the audience that to which he is speaking? What are their vital concerns? What is happening within the organizing and the developing and the evangelizing within the early Jesus community? And Mark's community is very different from that. I mean, Luke's community is very different than that of Mark's and of Matthew's. And so when Luke takes this image of Beelzebul, the location of Beelzebul as an historical and religious figure is in the area that was ruled by the Philistines. It's a Philistinian god. And there were other dimensions of religious expressions competing for the attention of this early Christian community when it is essentially in diaspora. And so what are the conflicts? What are the inner tensions? What are the inner dialogues that is taking place within the inner community? Add to that, then, what is, at least biblically, the origin and the development of these images of the demons and the Beelzebul, who tend not, as we in modern interpretations have done, is to align them with a sort of an equal but separate kind of power, but they represent domains and dominions of the spiritual imagination. And so when you put all of that together, who is the audience? What is the role of a Beelzebul? And especially in relation now to the Pharisees who emerge here, what is the dialogue? What is the tension? What is the argument? What is the point that Luke is trying to make? And it seems to me, at least at base level, this echo of temptations. What is the great temptation that Luke is attempting to address through this exchange of Jesus and these crowds who are so amazed? That would be my initial.
Is there anything more to add, Robert, before we read the next passage? There's been a lot covered there with Norman. Anything left?
I take a slightly different tack, just in the sense of I tend to focus more on Jesus than Beelzebul. I tend to see Beelzebul as a little more of just a placeholder for the bad. And what's interesting to me on the sort of Jesus focus is that first there's no controversy about Jesus actually doing this deed. So that's just an accepted given. He has done some marvelous thing. And then there's obviously division, and certainly that's an ongoing issue for virtually any religious community that at least acknowledges some sort of evil power or force or impulse in people, simply because people say X is good or here's an event, what do we make of it? Discernment still has to happen, and so decisions have to be made. Is this from God? Is this from humans? Is this from evil? And so I think that's kind of the primary problem of how do we discern? And of course this is an ongoing problem for churches, right? Just because somebody says Jesus told me to say this or whatever, or there still has to be some kind of, well, okay, yeah, that seems like it could be from God, or not. I don't think so, or whatever. So I think that's really interesting. And then just the last little, this weird unclean spirit coming back is just, I think, important to point out that it is kind of strange, and it's also almost as if it's a hotel or a room that's been prepared. And so it's like the demons are out looking for a travel lodge or something. And so it's just curious, but clearly the implication is, again, you have to ward, you have to be careful about discerning evil, not letting it back in once it's gone.
And it seems that, as we've said many times, Luke and Acts, it's the same deal. So in other words, what Luke is saying seems to be helping or at least addressing issues raised in his own Lucan community, as Norman pointed out, in which we've been making the point week after week. I wonder if Norman now could read the next passage. It picks up, obviously, right where we left off, but it shows actually the more of this effort to find, is there a sign, and why do we need a sign? And Jesus will not give a sign. Norman, that would be verse 27.
As he said this, a woman in the crowd raised her voice and said to him, "Blessed is the womb that bore you, and the breast that you sucked." But he said, "Blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and keep it." When the crowds were increasing, he began to say, "This generation is an evil generation. It seeks a sign, but no sign shall be given to it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah became a sign to the men of Nineveh, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. The queen of the south will arise at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, something greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will arise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, something greater than Jonah is here. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it in a cellar or under a bushel, but on a stand, that those who enter may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of the body. When your eye is sound, your whole body is full of light. But when it is not sound, your body is full of darkness. Therefore be careful, lest the light in you be darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, it will be wholly bright, as when a lamp with its rays gives you light."
We're going to take our break, but before the break, if Robert could give us a little observation as to the text that Norman just proclaimed.
Well, obviously the two pieces are this woman who cries out, the blessing, and it's actually got a textual difficulty or an interpretation difficulty. The but rather can actually be no, but rather, or it could be indeed, or it could be yes, but rather. And so that makes you have to figure out what kind of contrast or connection there is between the two. Clearly the blessing of the womb and the breasts is hearkening back to various Old Testament allusions and the blessing of Jacob to Joseph and other places in the Hebrew Scriptures. Some interpret this as Jesus is actually rejecting what the woman says. No, a woman, my mother, is not simply defined and blessed by making me, but rather by doing or hearing the Word of God. And that's a little bit like the Mary Martha controversy. The yes but might be the most likely, actually. Well, yes, sort of, but not really. Here is the more important thing. And Jonah is actually also quite difficult because it's not clear what the actual thing of Jonah that is requires focus. It could be in the belly of this sea beast, and which is usually taken as a symbol of resurrection in this context. It could be on Jonah actually bringing the message to Gentiles. It could be on Jonah's upsetness that the Gentiles actually repented. So Luke has this theme of bringing the light to the Gentiles and various insiders or former insiders in Israel are not happy with that idea. All the way back also to chapter 4 with preaching at the synagogue in Nazareth, where they didn't like Jesus telling the stories about the widow, Naaman the Syrian leper, also both outsiders who have been included in God's mercy and grace, and Jonah 2. So it could be a kind of double sign, both pointing to Jesus as the sort of preacher of the new message and of the various audiences, the Gentile and the resistors who don't want the message to go forth.
As you can see, a simple passage when you think, oh, I've got that Jonah story down, I know exactly where it's going. It's always going to be more complicated and more rich and more deep than you'd ever expect. We hope you're enjoying this effort to bring you the depths of these readings. We take our break right now, but stay tuned. We'll be right back to pick up exactly where we left off. Stay tuned.
KNXT-TV is proud to say thank you to all its viewers who have given their support for over 25 years. And only through your support is KNXT able to provide spiritual and informative programming. Please remember KNXT in your long-term support through wills, bequests, trust, and planned giving. Your gift is important to the future of Catholic television. Help preserve the strength of KNXT's message based on the teachings of Christ. Keep KNXT in your future plans.
Hello again and welcome to the second part of our 13th episode on the Gospel of Luke. We're at chapter 11, verse 37. Robert was telling us the inside-outside. Maybe that parable was about the idea of including the outsiders, or maybe not. We're going to have inside-outside, but in a different context in this next passage that he's going to read for us.
While he was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him, so he went in and sat at table. The Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash before dinner. And the Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you are full of extortion and wickedness. You fools, did not he who made the outside also make the inside? But give for alms those things which are within, and behold, everything is clean for you. But woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done, and without neglecting the others. Woe to you Pharisees, for you love the best seat at the synagogues and the salutations in the marketplaces. Woe to you, for you are like graves which are not seen, and men walk over them without knowing it." One of the lawyers asked him, "Teacher, in saying this you reproach us also." And he said, "Woe to you lawyers also, for you load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves will not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe to you, for you build tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses and consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them and you build their tombs."
What would we want to comment here? There's just a world of material. Is there something briefly to comment on right away?
I think, again, there are a couple of things that come to mind initially. And that the first would be that somewhat in Luke's narrative world, there is this issue of hospitality. The meal, the setting in the home of the Pharisee, implies that the Pharisees were continuing to test Jesus as a stranger, which picks up on the theme that Robert, you were just ending on with the whole idea of Jonah, the insider, the outsider. In this instance, Jesus is seen as the strangers and being invited in to the home of the Pharisees. And by definition, as a stranger, it's possible then, in the eyes of the Pharisees, to see Jesus as a possible danger to their community. And but as a part of a larger narrative setting, I think that Luke gives us, in which Jesus is in continual dispute with other leaders of the religious community of that time. So that was the first initial thought that came to mind. It really is a question about hospitality, who is welcomed. But I would also go back and had a reflection on this sense of the inside and the outside, what is clean from within. There are other places in which Jesus makes those kinds of allusions, and so Luke is using sort of a sense of parallelism as a way of reinforcing that kind of a look that the realm that Jesus is speaking of, what he speaks of by way of hospitality, is very different than that of the traditions in which now they are all in dialogue.
Robert.
Just one thing before I continue here, but the two allusions that may not be as obvious are, because there's several things that are being combined here. Luke not simply, but is collecting various things. But the woe to the Pharisees that they tithe mint and ruin every herb and neglect justice and love. It's really hard for me not to hear echoes of both Amos and Hosea in that. And of course, Hosea is also the one that indicts Baal worship. And so the Baal worship is also alluding or connecting, I think, back to the Beelzebul, because Beelzebul is the Baal of the heights or something like that. And so it's a reference kind of tying all that back, and immediately preceding that is the give for alms those things which are within, which also means the good things that should be within. And of course, Luke is also going to elsewhere emphasize material alms. And Amos is also very concerned, Hosea to a lesser extent, but also with the poor and the exploitation of the poor. So I really like how Luke is kind of tying together those themes. The second thing that may not be as obvious is just this weird woe to you, for you are like graves which are not seen, and men walk over you without knowing it. Graves were whitewashed so that they would be known to be there, because if you came in contact with a grave, you could become ritually unclean and by the contact with a corpse. And so it's actually quite a harsh saying, because Jesus is basically comparing his opponents to tombs that are not whitewashed. And so people think that there's nothing there to transfer. And so they are sort of ignorantly made unclean by these teachings.
One text I'd like to have Greg put up now is the one from Micah. It's as if we're seeing the prophets being brought up, where Jesus says, you neglect justice and the love of God. It seems to bring back that image of, you're going into the little stuff, you clean your cups and your bowls, but the heart of it all, you've totally missed it. You don't have justice, you don't love God. It's a very serious indictment, and I think seeing it as a prophetic tradition, as Robert points out, it makes it so helpful to see where Jesus fits in for Luke as re-echoing important Hebrew messages.
And in next episode, he's going to explicitly cite Micah. So just as something to look forward to.
Stay tuned. Continue where we left off, please.
Therefore also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, it shall be required of this generation. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering. And he went away from there. As he went away from there, the scribes and the Pharisees began to press him hard and to provoke him to speak of many things, lying in wait for him to catch him at something he might say.
Anything there before we're sort of closing? We may not be able to read the rest of the passages, but comment on them. Is there anything on what we just heard right now, or do we comment on chapter 12, which we might need to comment on without being able to read it all? We have like 3 or 4 minutes.
Again, I think that the way chapter 12 opens, when the crowd gathered by the thousands, I think Luke gives us a bit of a triptych through these sequences of passages that the crowds are gaining. He's indicating they are growing, they are enlarging, and that the more that Jesus is engaging the Pharisees and others, that his engagement is gaining resonance with a greater number of people. And this is one of the things that Luke is pointing to. But also I think that he talks about, it's very interesting in the second verse of the 12th chapter, nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. We have this sort of juxtaposition throughout the Gospels and among the various Gospel writers as to keeping things quiet, being secret. But here Luke is suggesting that there's nothing really secret about the unfolding of the realm of God. And that as people hear this with increasing frequency, greater and greater numbers of people begin to respond to that. It's resonating with them. And that is, in part, some of the contentiousness now that is existing between Jesus and this group of the Pharisees, who are also, as you so well, I think, indicated about Beelzebul. The Pharisees are kind of a placeholder as well for this dialogical back and forth.
And I think that's also, just to extend that point, we've talked a little bit previously on episodes that we have to be careful with how these verses sound, the killing of the prophets and these terrible people. And Luke is, I think, actually, he's not always doing the best job here, but he is trying to at least contextualize it in an internal dialogue within Judaism, so that by making reference to traditions in the Hebrew Scriptures of including outsiders, of rejecting true prophets, which certainly is part of the story, he does undercut that. But it's important to remember that his context is very different from ours, in the sense of it was much more, these are, Pharisees translates much better in the modern world to the church or something, because, or the magisterium even. And so we have to just be careful that we don't just equate it with the failed outsiders who should have known better, because that's certainly a wrong conclusion.
What a very strong point to end on our 13th episode of the Gospel of Luke. We're going to be missing you till we come up with the 14th, which will be, as they say, next season. But stay tuned, because during the year, these programs will be on YouTube, and you'll be able to see them and then put them all together. Till next time, God bless.